Recording in progress.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody attending by Zoom?
CNET so far.
Just Gina.
It's attached. Apparently, it's a little more difficult to find than I thought it would be on our website. If it alerted me that it's not under zoning, it's under the news and announcements section,
Oh,
but in case anybody's looking for it. Not that it's usually well attended, but
no, we don't usually get a big turnout for these kind of public hearings. It's time is upon us. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome you all to the select board meeting for April 22nd, 2025. There is a sign-in sheet on the table. If you didn't sign it on the way in, please do so before you leave, so we have a record of who is here this evening in attendance. I will ask everyone to rise and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
News and, oh, I know.
Oh, I think what I need to do is officially open the public hearing,
correct.
and I'll do that now. This is a review of the proposed Manchester Town Plan for 2025. There may be, there will be at least two public hearings, potentially more, depending on what we hear this evening or in the subsequent public hearing. The intent was to make changes to the town plan to bring it into compliance with state statute. There have been changes at the state level. We need to amend our town plan to be in compliance. So most of the changes that are being proposed are relative to that end. However, there is a rather lengthy section that was asked to be added by the Energy Committee. And much of it was already in here. There's a difference in the format and the way that it's worded. And there are some extra items that were added in by the Energy Committee. We were trying to keep it as simple as possible because we're under a time constraint as to when we can get the implement the changes that are prescribed by state statute. So
That's correct. So if you remember back in November, we contracted with BCRC to help us get this updated town plan adopted by May 9th, which is when our current one expires. And they laid out a timeline, which we've been pretty successful in adhering to. And tonight's the first of minimum two public hearings, like you said. So if no changes are made, we can hopefully hold that second public hearing on the 6th prior to our regular select board meeting, and then close it, and then you can adopt it at that meeting.
it will be on that agenda as an agenda item.
Correct, for possible adoption, right. And I was talking with Callie Fishburne today from BCRC, just updating certain things, and, you know, like we found you in front of you had the index page had one number that was not included, so we've put that in. And she reminded me that, you know, corrections such as that are different than revisions, whereas revisions would change the concept of the meaning of language. So without any minor changes other than corrections, we could adopt this on May 6th.
It's kind of difficult to run through it. I mean, it takes a long time. the document is available. I think the way it appears on the website, the changes are highlighted in red. I know on the copy that I have,
I did print off a clean copy for people and I have one here too for the board.
Okay.
Okay.
The one that's listed on the website on the
News
news
announcements.
is not the one that's highlighted in red. It does not have the edits.
That's good.
It is the all final version.
And we also updated the board members and staff and any changes we had there too.
Without the changes being highlighted on what's available to the public, it may be difficult for people to follow and have comments. And let's open up to a random section. What you see in red, if it's some of it's stricken out, but if it's underlined, it's an addition. And for us to go through all that language here this evening, I mean, you know, as I flip through pages, there's a lot here to digest, and it really all boils down to very little when it comes to substance. For instance, this whole page is almost all crossed out. It is all crossed out.
Because it had to go through a different
And
structure.
then it's, you know, when you get later on into the document, there's very few changes, but
Yeah, that
don't
is
know how-
hard to interpret.
I don't really know how to approach this in an efficient way to go through this document in a reasonable amount of time.
Well, I would suggest you just open it up for public comment. I mean, that's what we're here for, to hear public comment from anybody and you'll take that into the minutes and then.
Scott, I mean, these changes have been bandied about, obviously, with zoning commission and others in public hearings.
Well, yeah, the planning
This isn't
commission,
for the planning
the
commission.
planning commission
I'm sorry.
has been through the public hearing process.
So it's not the first time that
Yeah.
we're getting it in that last
And
iteration.
my understanding was that there were no changes made through the hearing process at the planning commission level.
Right, on your stricken version, you'll see that the yellow is what the PC either added or removed. And the red strikes are BCRC.
Yeah, see, mine's different than that. This was a copy that I got from Peter a while ago.
Okay,
So I have blue strikeout.
you got blue, I don't
I've got
know.
blue, I've got
I don't know
red,
what
I've got
blue is.
highlighted.
Okay,
We also had a really good meeting when the representative from BCRC went through why we were
adding and
making
subtracting.
the language changes to be in compliance. So that, I mean, if you're looking for context around why a lot of this and why it's kind of critical to have it done in a short timeline. And I think the other thing we should just say is that this is a working document that we're going to continue.
Yeah,
to-
it's the planning commission's intent, once we get this adopted, to immediately start a new version. So this is just to ensure that we have a town plan that doesn't expire, that stays in place. Because the whole zoning ordinance is based on the town plan. It's not a regulatory document. It is what it's called. It's a town plan. However, there's one exception to that. Under Act 250, one of the 10 criteria is, does it conform to the town plan? So it becomes regulatory under Act 250. So given that, what we try to do is have the town plan be general in nature and have the specifics in the zoning ordinance itself, or the land use ordinance.
Is it the state that mandates periodic
Yes.
update?
Um,
And
I've-
is it regulated every X amount? of
8 years.
It's an 8, you have to reapprove it or
Or
amend it
Right.
every 8 years. We're up against that window.
Yep.
But you don't have to wait 8 years to make an amendment.
Yep.
So the planning commission, there are certain aspects of it that's kind of unwieldy and a little difficult to navigate, and I think it could be simplified so that people could read it and actually understand it and find what they're looking for a little bit easier. And I think that's what the planning commission wants to do without undermining the effectiveness of the document. It's a tall order, but that's
Well, that's why you hired BCRC to help.
well, and that's our BCRC has the expertise in-house to deal with these kind of things. I think the planning commission can make much like the select board does here to make policy or guidance decisions, and then the BCRC will
Yeah.
draft those into a workable document.
The unique situation here, of course, is that we've hired BCRC to help us craft this, and then they have to put their stamp of approval before they can send it up north.
It's a little bit incestuous,
Yeah.
but at least approaching it that way, we have a pretty good idea that if we don't change anything, that they will stamp it to send it to Montpelier.
You would think.
I think, Mr. Chairman, the other factor in this new version is that mandates were, I guess the word might be stricken, and it was more aspirational. We weren't saying that these were absolutes. These were things that we were trying to achieve, not necessarily.
Yeah, in a lot of places, there might be a one-word change where it changes it from sounding as if it were a mandatory
Right.
and making it more suggestive. And then the document that makes it mandatory would be the ordinance.
The ordinance, right.
Through COVID and all of the added pressures on communities in Vermont, taking on so many new residents and need for housing and all these, are there any highlights? I haven't looked at the document. I think David downloaded it, but can you just go through any big highlights that might be changing? for the
Section
community
1.2.
Relating to housing and development?
Go ahead, Greg.
Section 1.2, housing. Housing missions support the development of housing types to meet the needs of a diversity of people, including those working and raising families in Manchester. Manchester goes on to discuss availability and affordability. And as that affects infrastructure and education, and it's pretty meaty, and it goes on for quite a while, and talks about targets. And I actually, Jonathan should speak to this because he's on the housing task force, but I think it probably mirrors what you're working with.
Yeah, there was no substantive change in the focus or anything about the housing section, because most of the content was simply bringing things up to speed with any requirements from the state. The parts that were updated were to include information specifically about the housing needs assessment that was done in 2024 and how those recommended targets were meeting the requirements of the housing needs here within the county. Those were included.
And those have been mandated by at state level, or they're just sort of like, hey, based on what we're seeing in your community, from the amount of kids that are attending school to new people to jobs to whatever, they sort of addressed to say, hey, for this county, or is it town by town, we'd like you to consider coming up with X number of new.
It's done on several levels. It starts with a understanding of the growth, the planned growth, the planned decrease in population. Essentially, that we have an aging population where we don't have as many births to offset our deaths. We have a rise in housing insecurity. And we have a growing number of factors such as second homeowners or increasing the burden on the general availability of housing. All in, that creates a certain number of needed homes, and that number, but depending upon whether you go to pre-COVID range, which was 1%, or during COVID at the peak, which was 1.8% growth, will determine whether the potential was for the need for 36,000 or 48,000 homes in the entire state of Vermont over the next 6 years. And then you take that number and you break it down based on many factors within each county. And then the BCRC has gone even further in looking at the factors of availability within each town to say, okay, well, because of their infrastructure, because of what they have available, these are the things that this town can contribute towards the housing needs. So in Manchester, for instance, our 6-year target is 200 homes. At our current rate, we're averaging 13.2 permits per year. So, we've got a ways to go to hit a target that's the potential that's 200. Now, it's not a mandate, to be clear, these numbers are not mandated. It's just looking at what the expectations are of what it is believed to be needed, and the types of housing, whether it's ADU, 1 unit, 2 unit, whether it's 1 bedroom, owner, rental. And I think the BCRC put another factor in, which is they put infrastructure as a major piece, but whether or not there's the available housing infrastructure, like Bennington has a significantly more large buildings that can accommodate apartment complexes or those types of things, whereas Manchester might be more medium-sized to single-family homes. So that also went into account to what percentage of that 200 was for rentals and what part of it was for ownership.
There's a lot that plays into it. I mean, Manchester is a commercial hub. We provide goods and services to a greater regional area. We provide educational institutions and opportunities to a larger group of towns. We provide employment. We provide necessary goods. We have grocery stores and such that surrounding towns may not have, and the housing becomes tricky because while Manchester has fewer residents than jobs, the actual ability to find a home can spread out into the surrounding communities. So a lot of it becomes more of a regional issue than a local issue, but Manchester wants to do its part. And of course, as the demand for housing stock pushes out because it's so expensive to find in Manchester, it drives the price up in the surrounding communities. And when I was on the planning commission 40 some odd years ago, we were talking about affordable housing as we are now. And at that point in time, there was a very well-known planning commissioner who said, well, Manchester already has affordable housing. It's called Sunderland and Danby. And he was kind of right. I mean, he said it kind of tongue in cheek, but it was true. And that's still the case, although Sunderland has become pretty expensive and Danby's going in that direction. Certainly is a problem throughout the whole region.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would say that is something that's true globally.
Yeah.
Right? If you
Yeah,
wanted to go and work at the.
You hear about it
Democrats and
on
same
the
with
national news, and certainly it's an international problem as well.
I would add, I spoke saying that there wasn't substantive changes that the town of Manchester specifically put into that plan, other than referencing the housing needs assessment. There were, one of the mandates that is requirement to bring this up to speed is the Home Act, which was one of the things that passed that says that any residential unit or residential development area that is serviced by municipal water and sewer must be allowed to have up to 5 homes on the acre. So if your regulations in town said, 1 acre, 1 home, even if it's by municipal sewer and water, the Home Act says that it has to be 5 to 1. And that's for increasing density where we likely can build faster. So if you have access to sewer, you have access to water, those are the key elements to determining how quickly you can get a project off the ground.
Interesting.
And of course, a project is way different than an individual.
Yeah.
An individual can buy a piece of land and build a house on it and not be in violation of any.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm not saying you have to build 5. You have the ability to build up to 5.
And there's other little changes in here, you know, it speaks to infrastructure. And, you know, we think of electricity and water and sewer, but infrastructure also includes broadband internet. And the addition to this document now includes the Southern Vermont Communications Union District, which Manchester is a member. And at our last meeting, we had a presentation by our elected member to that board, that broadband internet is now completely saturated. How many towns? Is it
14.
14 towns that are members of this in Southern
One
Vermont?
of the first.
So, and Manchester was already considered saturated when this started, but we became a member in order to add some gravity and some depth to the issue. And that's happened. So it's now mentioned in the town plan. There's little things like that have happened. Not a significant change. It just gives people information that exists.
So if we do see technical errors, there's 2 that there's a chart that's being cut off on page 14, the Manchester energy goals. There's bullet points in a square. It's being cut off. And then the other thing.
What page is that, Jonathan?
Page 14.
Okay.
And then I know the updated table of contents uses numericals, the actual like numbers, but the appendix is actually in Roman numerals. And it's also referencing the 2017 town plan at the header and the footer. So it looks like that was copied over.
That's in the appendix?
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
the page after 104.
Okay.
Basically the footer says that it's from town plan 2017.docx. And the header says town plan 2017.
Are there any other comments or questions about the town plan at this point?
I think of it just the 3, from a real broad perspective. I appreciate.
You know what? I'm gonna ask you to go to because GNAT will be able to pick up what you're saying better, since they're the only one on
Oh,
Zoom.
yeah. There's a microphone over there.
There's a microphone on the, I believe.
No.
No.
Oh, it's not there.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Let's just speak loudly.
I'll speak loudly.
Or right up to here,
Just
maybe.
had a lot of good work done by everyone involved. So is there any thought to the cyclical nature of how things move here and everywhere in terms of adjustments that might have to be made fairly nimbly? Meaning, is there any way to scale up or scale down considering market environment? I mean, I know we're setting this document, but
Yeah, I mean, what the town does is it creates and sets guidelines as to how things can happen, but the town doesn't make things happen. That comes from the private sector. So the private sector will see a need and an opportunity and try to meet that need, and they'll work through the documents the town has in place. And it's our job to make sure that we have the right documents in place to accommodate that developer or whatever the entity is, in order for them to invest their money and meet the need that the economy or circumstances provide. Government doesn't really do much, especially municipal government, is in this process other than set the guidelines, and that's what we're trying to do here.
Clearly, we pull several different angles on, we want this, and they want that, but I recognize that the government's here is a door that can be opened, but it'll ultimately be up to.
And most changes to the town plan, but even more so, the land use ordinance, formerly known as a zoning bylaw, occur because of a project that comes in or somebody comes in with an application and it's not allowed. And you say, we didn't think of that. You know, it's not that it's a bad idea. It's just not allowed under the ordinance. We're not going to give you a variance. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea for everybody. We're going to change the ordinance. And that's how almost all the amendments come about. And our ordinance was really good. In 1971, when we put zoning in place, prior to 1971, there's no zoning in Manchester. The town developed very nicely over that period of time. And the original zoning ordinance built on that foundation, but it was drafted in a way that the most intense development and the commercial uses and all that would be in the center of town, and then it would be less on the outside of town. And that's been the premise of it for, there wasn't a lot of strict development allowed in the original zoning ordinance, and we've allowed it to creep out a little bit over time, but I think we've kept things contained. We've got the energy there. The investment is there because that's where it's allowed to happen. And this is a continuation of that. And what you try to do is balance that against a need for housing to be more affordable, but it becomes really difficult. I mean, there's only so much you can do with regulation. I talked about Danby earlier. They don't have zoning. So if zoning was the stumbling block, you'd think there'd be a housing boom in Danby. So there's more to it than that.
It's fairly organic.
Where you go to a state that doesn't have billboards.
Yeah.
You come back to Vermont, you know, rules are good.
Well, I tell you what,
It's like,
we owned a farm south of town. It's where Equinox Valley Nursery is now. There's that red barn there. That was ours. And there was a Bromley Mountain ski area billboard on the side of that barn. And we got free season passes because of it. And then the legislature changed the rules and we lost our season passes. So, you know, I have mixed feelings about billboards, but I think generally I agree with you.
yeah, no, I remember the Ridgeline development that was proposed and it was, I think it was really pretty hotly contested out in Dorset. And yeah, it's just interesting, you know, to see what different towns tend to do to try to preserve the character of why you want to live here in the first place. And, you know, it's good to have people that want to serve on boards and the public who wants to come and be involved in helping to steer the town in a direction that.
Well, and you think about like right now, there's so much kind of, it's like parking is such a huge issue. And then you try to think maybe in 10 years, is that really going to be, it's hard to, you know, maybe it still is an issue, or maybe it's a totally different issue that we haven't even thought of yet. So it's, you try to also kind of project where, not just where all the pain points are at the moment, but where things
What's gonna happen
might be
in the future.
moving towards.
One of the things that we struggled with was the only place where auto dealerships were allowed was right in the center of the town in the commercial core. It doesn't make sense to tie up that much space for an auto dealership when and I mean, what happened was new dealerships as they came in built in neighboring towns such as East Dorset.
And
And
subsequently closed.
yeah, it didn't
But
last. And the one that's in the middle of Manchester still exists. One of them became a park, but
Yeah, I like the diversity. I like having, you know, Hand or Laneway or whatever it's called now. It's always been sort of a good.
used to be Toomey's, used to be BM Toomey.
Survived many ups and downs, so.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah.
But we had the Ford dealership, Ford Mercury, which is where the town green is now.
Yep.
Henry Charbonneau had
Leo's
a
Motors.
garage. There was,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
there was a lot of, there were a lot of smaller dealerships around town.
Yeah.
Um,
I just like keeping it real a little bit, you know, at some point back in the eighties, everything was just outlets all over the place, and it's kind of nice to see a couple of just actual businesses that were serving the people who live here, so.
And another piece, I mean, we're just talking now. It says
Yeah.
gas stations. Where do gas stations belong?
Yeah.
Middle of town, edge of town, up by the interchange.
Yeah.
We've seen gas stations come and go in the downtown. I can think of 3 on 7A that have disappeared. One's a vacant lot now, which might be a parking lot, but it's not very big.
So you also think about how this document, like, there's some stuff in here about sidewalks, for example, and how,
Yeah.
or community recreation, or how we're trying to move away from being an outlet place and more of a recreational thing. So then that can inform where we're thinking about where we should be putting our capital, and is that in developing trails and park systems and other ways to connect different areas of the town, like the Riverwalk, and you know, there's a lot of not-for-profits that do some of that work, but where we can fill in and kind of get to the finish line is with some of this stuff. So, I mean, this is definitely like a guiding document that informs where we should be looking to invest our money and, you know, and spend taxpayer money in terms of encouraging certain things to happen. So, and I think that when this was written, there was a ton of input from the public, that, you know, 8 years ago, I guess it was, where people really did talk about recreation being probably more important than retail, that, you know.
We've done a series of charettes and other, it was the Manchester 2000, Manchester 2020.
2020.
There was where the community was involved in a major way, and over the course of several meetings that was facilitated by a group that does that sort of thing, and getting an idea of what the people of Manchester really wanted, and most of that was integrated into the town plan, and has been over the years, and we've done that a lot. That sort of activity takes place because there's grant money available. That may or may not be something that we see in the future, but that would start at the planning level, and to see if it was something that we wanted to accommodate.
Parking analogies pretty close to the real estate analogies. There's parking, people just don't want to park there.
Right, yeah,
It's kind of,
Yeah.
somewhat, I know it's different, but.
yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're just having a discussion here. If there's no questions or comments, I think what we could do for our next meeting is just have and maybe I'll try to do this, is put together, or have Peter do it, just a very brief explanation of the more significant changes that we made to bring this in compliance with the state statute, which is really what it's all about. And that way people will have the information.
Sure.
BCRC could actually send that to us.
They did,
Yeah.
and I was looking for it,
Yeah.
and I couldn't find it.
She had something like she had a, what's it called, PowerPoint,
Yeah,
Right.
that went through all of these, so.
Right.
maybe we
Yeah.
should- That would be.
we don't need to reinvent that.
No, I think we should just get that,
Okay.
yeah,
Probably should, yeah.
and
And
then,
just be posted too on our website with it.
yeah, I mean, I'm
I
sure.
don't know what format she had it in. Do you remember?
It was, she shared it.
It was Google Slides, and she could just export it as a PDF and we could put it on the website.
All right.
That's some of the changes made.
Or why we were doing, what we had to do to get into compliance, and
Yeah.
it was kind of the administrative side of it.
Yeah, and there was a timetable
Yeah.
attached to it.
Yeah, I've got
The really fun
Yeah.
stuff is gonna happen after this is adopted, and planning is gonna go right after it and start with another version that I think is forward thinking, and we'll have a lot of good input at that point.
Well, and I think this also makes me feel like we need to,
This is basically
Narrow it down.
a readoption of the existing town plan that's been updated to make sure that we're in compliance with the
Mhm.
changes
Right.
in state statute. And that's basically what we're
And
talking.
then they have 8 years to,
well, we want them to do it way faster.
and they want to do it way.
They want to do
About
it.
8 years can go by
But we,
and we'll find ourselves in 8 years just reapproving what we have.
Start off real strong.
It used to be 5 years.
It was,
That was 5 years and that really did happen a lot. I mean, you'd just say, we didn't get to it, so we just reapproved the thing. And
well, I almost feel like they, just the energy section alone, it's 2/3 of the document. We
Yes.
should have a separate energy plan.
Yes,
I just-
agree with that.
it's
I don't
way
like
too-
having a lot of specifics
No.
in the town
Where
plan.
to put trees in a parking lot? I mean, we can't do that. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah, it needs to reference.
There are some good other documents they're looking at that from other towns that have gone through the process that are really compelling.
Yeah.
And that I think they want to adopt some of that. So we'll see how it goes.
Will that deck from BCRC be, changes be posted online for?
Yeah, we'll get that up as soon as I can get my hands on it and make these modifications, these slight changes that Jonathan's recognized, so.
Should the limit be for us to see the red letter copy?
Yeah, you don't need that. That just.
Changes that Jonathan mentioned, those are just clerical errors.
Yep.
More than anything.
That's all I can say.
Good.
Well, send me a quick email, just so I don't leave it out. If that's not one that.
You wanted us to cover here tonight?
No, my name's Andrew, I'm a town resident. I really just came to listen.
Yeah.
I thought there might be more action.
We can get some going if you want. Bring up something controversial.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything controversial. I think, the town plan is very well thought through and well written. If anything, I would say that, well, I think like most people, section 2.1, in my mind, is the most important. I think the town should and needs to continue to do anything within its power to accelerate the development of housing. And I know it's not just Manchester, that's a statewide and nationwide issue, but I really do worry about the future of our town if there's not a place for workforce to live and families to live. And so I think it's like really critical. It feeds into every other economic dream that Manchester has for its future. If people can't live here, I just don't see how any of that other stuff is possible.
Nicely said. Yeah, exactly.
There's some meetings that I think are gonna focus on some proposals coming up, so
Yes.
come to those too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're,
I think, things like, I know the select board in particular in the town, as we were just talking about, can only do so much. Like, it's up to the private sector to come in and fill that need and see that opportunity. I know that there are some places where maybe there's a bit of a more thumb on the scale, like Airport Road, the town owns that land. Like, if there are things, I don't know the history.
and there is a proposal.
Yeah, I've seen that
Airport
there's
project.
one that has come out, or a concept of a proposal. But if there are things that the town can be doing to like meet these private developers where they are to accelerate as much as possible those plans, I would, as a resident.
One of the biggest issues, and there's, of course, is a way to make this work, but there have been individuals in the past that have developed neighborhoods with the idea of it being affordable, and they actually did create affordable housing, and working people moved in there. But it was only affordable in the first instance. And then as housing prices went up and housing became in demand, those people sold their house for a much larger sum of money, and now they've all escalated to the point where they're out of the range of working people. And so there has to be a deed restriction or some kind of something in the permit which controls price escalation going forward, or else it ceases to be affordable housing at some point. And that's very easy to do in today's environment. Back when these properties were developed, some of them 40 years ago or more, it was a guy that wanted to do something good for the community and put in these houses, and they didn't stay affordable. So there are proposals circulating for various places around town that are local people making a proposal and have the wherewithal to do it and want it to be affordable. And it's really kind of cool to see people stepping up and trying to figure out how to do this and asking, and in some places pointing out as to what the town's involvement should be in that. And then I have to step back and play devil's advocate and say, well, look, there are people that have sacrificed and made a commitment and purchased a property or maybe built a home with their own hands. They have a mortgage that they're barely paying. They have their property taxes. And we can't ask those people to contribute so somebody else can come in and have an easier path, because they're just barely getting by. So that's the other part that we have to balance on this. Is we can't put it on the backs of individuals that have made the commitment and been able to make it work for themselves to the point where they can't continue to do it. And that's true in any of these endeavors. There's always unintended or unforeseen circumstances and consequences. And because they're unforeseen, sometimes we don't know about it until it's actually happened. But
Well, I think it's also just a matter of trying to actually redefine what is affordable housing. You know, and it's just like,
The big
if
rub.
you work at the hardware store and I'm a teacher at Matt's, I mean, what does that even look like? Because
yeah, well, I mean, there's plenty of information out there that tells us what that looks like.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, the ability to buy a nice piece of property and build a house and have your own kingdom probably isn't something that can be attained by
well,
the average
especially
people.
in
That
the last
and the American dream has changed.
5 or 6
I mean,
years.
I'm the old guy at the table. You know, I've been here. My family's been here for generations. My idea of the way I want to live, because I live on a farm, is very different from what it's hard for me to understand the people wanting to come to Manchester to live in a housing complex,
Yeah.
a suburban or even urban style housing complex. I can't fathom that. So I trust other people to tell me there is a demand for that and there is a want and a need for that.
Well, I just think just looking at it at a little bit bigger of a scope, like you were saying, you start out with a very dense area, the downtown area, and then as places grow, it's just like New York, you know?
I mean, density is one of the big keys for
Yes.
affordability.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where our mandate to provide, infrastructure becomes relevant to the cost of a project like that, where we
Yeah.
provide a sewer or water, connection where that makes the affordability so much better.
But the town of Manchester Sewer Department, the town of Manchester Water Department are enterprise funds separate from the general fund that operate on a balanced budget on the backs of the people that use their services. The people that are connected to the sewer, connected to the water, pay the fees that run those companies. So we can't ask those companies to make a social contribution because that's not in their mandate from us or the state. So that has to come from the social connection has to be through the legislative body, the select board. And we would have to figure out a way to make the water department or the sewer department whole on any infrastructure that they provide to extend to development for housing. So it becomes very complicated.
It is, it's very,
Because once again, you can't ask the people that are simply users of those systems to pay for the ability for somebody to come in and have an easier ride than they had when they came in.
well, it's also just looking around over the past, 6 to 10 years of just retail stores closing down. And just all those buildings where PacSun used to be, they just tore them down. So you're like, wow, it seems to me like there's a lot of existing structures that would be interested to integrate that.
This was something that we learned in the outlet retail boom, was that it was more important that the buildings that were built to accommodate that particular demand at that point in time and were built in a way that they could be more flexibly used, not just a single purpose building. The buildings that you were talking about, they were built to be retail buildings. That's really, you couldn't really convert them to anything else. You look at the 3 buildings that were built on the town property, they were built to be retail buildings, so they could really have many different uses. That's more of an example as to how that could have been built, but
Some of those.
when
are
they built,
converted
when they
to
originally
retail
built the
places.
factories at Factory Point, which made the nucleus of this town, they only lasted a few years. But that created the energy that we've built on as every single new thing has come along. And you take advantage of those opportunities, or the momentum goes in the other direction. And, you know, we talk about the outlet shopping. Doesn't mean a lot to me, but it was an opportunity for people in town to generate more energy and have more things happen here. It's happened. Manchester is a magical place. As these things run their normal life and they go away, the next thing comes along. And it's because we took advantage of that opportunity when it came along that we have the foundation to move on to the next.
Yep.
Did we think outlet shopping was going to last forever? No. Did we didn't know that the internet was going to force it out, but nothing lasts forever. Like I said, the original factories lasted like 3 or 4 years.
The other good news that we don't talk a lot about is that our housing problem is largely an employee housing problem. And employers are addressing it.
Mhm.
And so, well, Bromley and or Stratton has bought underperforming motels, and RK Miles has built 2 or 3 units with 6, I guess. I'm not sure if there's 6, 2 per unit. But that's happening too, and we don't bring that up enough.
Yeah,
That's a really good thing.
and that's happening.
It is
That's happening everywhere.
And they're much more nimble than we are.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah.
And there are things that are doing a good job of it and companies that are failing miserably at it. Names, but there's plenty of empirical evidence.
We can't legislate success.
Only advise it.
I advise. Well, that and obviously, we know when we hire people in town, what our pay rates are, what they can achieve toward, and it's, you know, my definition, I feel very fluid understanding the economics of housing and the cost of housing, and empirically see what wages are like in town. It's a struggle. It's a big
Just
divide.
doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
You have the highest percentage of folks spending greater than 50% of their annual income on housing in Manchester than any other town in the county.
Find out with that.
Yeah.
Cause what's the percentage?
30
It should be about 30.
or less is deemed it's deemed housing that's affordable in your price range. That doesn't apply to, you know, what is deemed housing, like lower income housing.
I don't know if they put the 30 in the housing document, but it's a commonly accepted standard. If you were to back that out of the workers that are actually looking, that price is so far down the scale. I think they originally had thought homes on their original proposal was maybe homes on the airport road property for $200,000 average. I mean, that's brushing up against the limit. And I don't know that we'll be even scratching anything close to that. I mean, inflation aside, it's only been 2 years since.
That was the last administration price. The current administration price is now 257.5.
Well, cycles, we have, they go up and down, so I've kind of been exposed to real estate, or at least had an understanding of it since 1980, but sometimes from afar, sometimes a second home, or sometimes permanent, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. You guys have your work cut out for you.
But with that, I think this was supposed to be your slam dunk, just quick
Yeah.
meeting. I'm out of here.
We had a fun.
Thank you for coming.
Conversation.
Yeah.
We're not used to just walking in and sitting down and then turning around and walking out.
I could get used to that. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much for all the hard work.
And,
Nice to meet you, Andrew.
at this point, do we recess the hearing to a point, to a date specific, or do we close this one and then reopen and?
Yeah, it's not a quasi judicial, so you close this one.
That's what I thought.
The other one.
So, the only motion that I can take in the context of a hearing is a motion to close or recess
So moved.
that hearing.
Oh, so moved.
Move to close.
Yeah, it happened down there.
Okay.
Jonathan and Greg.
I second.
Yeah. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, that hearing is closed. Is there other business?
Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, our next meeting is May 6th. Public hearing will be at 6:30. And the regular meeting will start at 7:00.
Come on, come around.
And just as an FYI, I will not be at that meeting that night. I have
Oh, no.
family commitment in Burlington, so. But Katie will be here and I'll lay everything out for you. And we'll have we have the airport road RFP results for you to accept and look at that point too.
Yeah, I have it in at 6:30.
6:30. So the regular meeting will start at 7 or immediately after the
Immediate.
hearing,
Oh,
in case it goes long.
yeah. Oh, I got that. It'll start
It'll start at 7
that's,
or
or later if the hearing.
public hearing goes long.
Gotcha. It can't start earlier because we warned it.
Right.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Move to second and all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned. I just want to make sure I have that.